Hey, it's Jim LaPierre. This is Sober Now. Today's topic, overcoming social anxiety in recovery. Incredibly common that folks struggle with this. A lot of us do even years into recovery. So, as always, welcoming your questions and comments. Would love to hear questions that you have, what your experience is, how you overcame this, all of that and more. Streaming today on Sober Now's Facebook page. If you haven't been over there yet, please give it a quick like. It will get you notifications and let you know when we're doing more live streams and posting some pretty cool content. Streaming on choosehelp.com today and a few other feeds. So please write in. Let me know what's going on with you. Would love to hear your experience, strength, and hope, and would love to hear some questions that you have. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so like I said, social anxiety, incredibly common. Tens of millions of Americans live with it, and folks in recovery, it's just kind of the norm. It's just kind of what we expect. It's nervousness, it's worry, it's awkwardness, being resistant to doing new things, meeting new people, essentially stepping outside of our comfort zone. We are people who tend to be very resistant to change, and what I've learned about resistance is that it's always fear. There's an important difference between fear and anxiety, though. Fear is very specific. Anxiety is very general. It globalizes. Very often we're concerned about things, worried about things that haven't even happened, may never happen. But again, these are very common and they're understandable. They're even endearing, as hard as that might be to believe. Awkwardness is really what we're guarding against. We want to look like we have it together. We want to seem like we know what we're doing. And what it's really about is the pressure that we put on ourselves to maintain appearances, to speak well, to present ourselves well. And this speaks to all of the pressure that we put on ourselves because too many of us fight a losing battle for self-control. My goal is to let my higher power be in control, and I also have an awareness that control is largely an illusion. On my good days, the only thing I'm in control of is me. I'm not trying to control things that I'm powerless over, people, places, or things. I'm not trying to run the show or dictate how things are going to go, and the more I practice that, the better my days typically are. But we're all human. When we take one step outside that comfort zone, we tend to tense up. We tend to go back to old habits. We become self-conscious, and we fight this losing battle. So what I'm hoping to sell you on is the idea that you can embrace being awkward. Because in my experience, the very best things in life are awkward. Healing is awkward. It has to be. Growth is awkward. By definition, it's outside of what's familiar to us. Learning is awkward. Taking on new projects, new friendships, new relationships, the awkward feelings of being on a first date, the newness of things is typically what makes us so uncomfortable. And I think we have to allow ourselves to just be more genuine because, particularly in recovery, if you're anxious, if you're struggling, if you're nervous, well, first of all, any but good person in recovery remembers what that felt like. And it speaks to our expectations. We don't expect people to be patient with us. But the ones worth knowing will be. When we put pressure on ourselves to look like we know what we're doing or to have it together, too often we run the risk of appearing aloof. People might take us for being a snob or disinterested or standoffish. And so all of these approaches really limit our opportunities. And that's not something that we ever consciously do. But it is something that if we're not mindful, if we're not aware of self in a way that is healthy and balanced, we have a tendency to project. We have a tendency to decide how other people perceive us, what they think of us, and we would do very well to give people the right to their own opinion. My experience, especially with people in recovery, is that they tend to be incredibly welcoming. I've never been anywhere that I was better well received than in a 12-step fellowship. Going into a group therapy session, going into anything that's healthy for me, especially the first time, I'm going to go in feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And if I can own that instead of hiding it, I have a lot more options. Hiding is part of fight or flight. It's something that we learn through traumatic experiences, and it just never, ever, ever serves us. I often get to talk to folks about going to their first AA meeting or their first NA meeting, and folks will say to me, well, what if I see somebody I know? And I laugh and I say, well, then they're there for the same reason that you are. I even get this with folks coming into my waiting room for mental health therapy or for some addiction counseling, and they'll say, well, what will people think of me, or what will their impression be? And I get to remind them, they're here for the same thing that you are, right? So one of the many challenges with social anxiety is that it strips away context. And we forget, this is a big part of our terminal uniqueness. We forget that other people struggle with the same issues. We forget that other people have anxiety. Other people are perhaps uncomfortable. And there's an adage that you see going around on Facebook as a meme quite often. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle. I've always found that to be true. And what I've also noticed is that this is one more example of our black and white thinking. So we expect people to think poorly of us. We have all of these expectations about how they'll interact with us, how they'll receive us. And those predictions, those anticipations are always at the extremes, right? People either have to love us or hate us, and we're a lot more confident in the idea that they'll reject us than we are in the idea that they'll maybe see us as a new friend. I worked with an old-timer in AA years ago who said to me in our first meeting, he said, I only have two fears, that you'll like me and that you won't. And either way, it's uncomfortable. So I understand that. I also know there's an adage that my saltier friends in AA use that I appreciate, and it's asked as a question. You know what people think about you? They don't. They're preoccupied with their own problems, their own insecurities. And that's actually a really important point too. Insecurities and inhibitions are really what drive social anxiety, and so the desire to hide those things about ourselves, to not let other people see them, the ways in which we fight against being vulnerable are usually what drive social anxiety to its peak. If we can simply allow ourselves to be who we are, everything works better. But in early recovery, we have a little extra patience for folks because it's really hard to be yourself when you don't feel like you know who that is. I'm going to check in for some questions real quick. Helen, thank you. Could I rebroadcast the talk on ACOAs? I absolutely will make it a point to do that. And I appreciate your comment that new friendships are hard to find. They can be. I oftentimes will ask, where are you looking? My experience is if I go to 12-step fellowships, if I go to support groups, even if I pursue hobbies and interests, then what happens is I'm going to meet people with similar interests with no real pressure, and just something as simple as striking up conversations, having a shared experience opens the door to friendship. And it's one more of those things that we tend to hide. First of all, the fact that maybe we don't have many friends, or tragically, maybe we don't have any at all. Particularly in recovery, a lot of us discover that, we didn't really have friends. We had people that we did drugs with. Or the friendships that we had were all trauma bonds. Maybe the people that we went through horrible things with became very close relationships, but maybe those relationships weren't healthy, or maybe they were even toxic. And so the opportunity to simply create some avenues, get around like-minded people, get around people who have similar interests, get together around a particular cause that you believe in, get together around things that are happening in your community. I always think of Woody Allen's quote that 80% of success is showing up, and I absolutely have found that to be true. If I show up and I'm in the moment and I'm open to new possibilities, amazing things can happen. But if I try to think my way into making myself more comfortable, if I overthink, where am I going to meet people or how am I going to make these new connections? I think what was most surprising and what most furthered my growth spiritually was to notice that if I put myself out there, my higher power would ensure that I crossed paths with kindred spirits, that I could make new connections and get my needs met. And honestly, I think it takes a lot of growth to come to have that as an expectation. I think typically, left to our own devices, we expect that whatever's happened in the past is going to continue to keep happening. We don't necessarily expect that people will like us. We expect that they'll treat us the same way that people did in the past. And if we're hanging around the same people, if we're gravitating towards people that are familiar to us, that are like the folks that we've known in the past, then it's reasonable to maintain those same expectations. But if we change, if the people that we're relating to are different, if we're seeking out some opportunities, then we have to be open to the idea that things can turn out well. We tend to just stick with our expectations, and that's problematic for a lot of reasons. Expectations are subconsciously developed, subconsciously maintained. And most of us have this weird sense of deja vu, like whatever happened in the past has to keep happening, and it just doesn't have to be that way. I'm going to pause just for a second and check some of our other feeds, because I always love hearing from you all what's going on with you, and if you have questions that are off topic, that's okay. I very much welcome those as well. This is one of those embarrassing moments where I'm juggling technology and remembering that I'm an old person. Marie, thanks for writing in. How do you deal with family that doesn't want anything to do with you, parents in particular? I'm sorry, that's such a painful thing to go through. You know what? I'm going to share this with you, because what I've learned about most of my struggles, and especially what I've learned about anxiety, is that it's almost always over something that I'm powerless over something that I have no control over whatsoever. And there's a passage that I'm going to share with you from the Big Book of AA that I've just found to be really, really transformative for me. Really, I've found a lot of peace in it. So for folks in the program, you already know it. It's 417. And it's, to me, one of the most beautiful things written in any book. The passage is, "Acceptance is the answer to all of my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life to be unacceptable, and I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake. Until I could accept my alcoholism, I could not stay sober. Unless I accept life completely on life terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as what needs to be changed in me and in my attitudes." Now, the vitality of that quote is that it speaks to powerlessness, and it speaks to things that I need to come to acceptance of. And too often, the things that I need to accept are things that I see as fundamentally unacceptable. So, my family of origin is a good example. I'll use that. No matter what I tried, trying to get the approval, the acceptance, the unconditional love of my family of origin was something that was unattainable. And to come to acceptance of that, honestly, is a uniquely painful thing. In retrospect, I morbidly joke about this sometimes. Looking back, especially in the relationship that I had with my biological parents, I have to give them credit for one thing. Absolute, total consistency. Like, they weren't great some days and terrible other days. They were just consistently the way they were. And unfortunately, the way that they were didn't allow for me to get my needs met. And so I adjusted, and I tried to earn love and acceptance, and I tried to make them proud, and I tried to prove things to them. And what I've learned is it's impossible to prove things to people who either don't care or aren't paying attention, or both. Sometimes folks are just too caught up in their own stuff to pay attention or to be concerned about what I need. It's especially painful when it's biological family, because we have this innate yearning desire for connection and for family. We have this innate desire for closure. So when we're struggling, when we've been through something that was adversarial or abusive, then we want to come to acceptance, but we also want to, have some amends made, have some accountability, have some opportunity, even if it's just an opportunity to say goodbye. And sometimes those things are just unattainable to us. And to come to acceptance of that is to let go of the false hope that it could be any different. I think a lot of us get stuck in asking, what is it about me? What have I done? How did I cause this? And I think if we can take a step back, if we can look at it the way that we would if it was a friend's life, if we can allow ourselves some support and outside input, then we come to the truth that it's not about us. Unfortunately, people make unhealthy choices. They stay bitter, they stay sick. And when I find myself being rejected by people who are sick and selfish, then that's not about me. But that too is hard to accept, because if it's not about me, that means that I can't change it. I can't fix it. And as ACOAs, as adult children of alcoholics and addicts, we want to fix everything. As people who survive trauma, we want to fix everything. As survivors of abuse and neglect, we want to fix everything. And what I've learned is I can't. The only person that I've ever fixed is me. Even in my professional role, I don't fix people. I help them fix themselves. And so what I've learned about mental health and trauma and substance use disorder is that there's a lot of dimensions to it. There's a lot that's going on with it. But I'm a big believer and proponent of the Keep It Simple system. And the simpler I keep things, the more I see clear courses of action, the more I see opportunities to cope, and the more I see my need for support. And social anxiety is a major obstacle to developing those connections, allowing ourselves that support, and asking for our needs to be met. In the simplest possible terms, I've found that anxiety is primarily caused by not allowing ourselves to both feel and express our real, true feelings. A lot of us struggle because what was modeled for us growing up around emotions like anger was really unhealthy. And so when we don't allow ourselves to express anger, that's limiting. But when we don't allow ourselves to even feel anger, that's debilitating. Depression and anxiety tend to go hand in hand. Typically when a person has one, they have the other. And it's based around the things that we don't allow ourselves to feel, cope with, express, and get our needs met around. A minute ago I was touching on closure, and what I've learned is that in most cases, closure is something that has to be resolved and worked through between me and me. I need to have closure around needs that I have that weren't met by my family of origin, and I can choose to allow my chosen family to meet those needs. I can identify that past pain and resentments are things that I used to say I can't do anything about them, or I used to say that looking at the past won't change it. But what I came to recognize was that what I most needed to change was me. And the more I was able to let go of past pain, through grieving specifically, the more free I became. The more I realized that I could allow myself to express anger without losing control, the more free I became. I recognized that, just as with most of us, there's an accumulation of everything that is uncomfortable. There's an accumulation of resentment. There's an accumulation of pressure, all because we don't allow ourselves to simply say, here's what I'm feeling, here's what I need, here's what I want, and asking for those who support us to help meet those needs. So these are all of the many reasons that I favor simplicity. And I'm going to check the feeds one more time. I would love to hear from you. How's your day going? How's your recovery going? What's going on with you? Let me know about that. I want to connect with you too. Jim at sobernow.com is the quickest and easiest way to do that. Drop me a line with questions that you have. Drop me a line with topics that you'd like to see covered in future talks. And definitely check out a couple of things. The first one is our YouTube channel. Sober Now has about, I keep losing track, 125, 130 videos now on different aspects of recovery from substance use disorder, recovery from mental illness, and recovery from trauma. And those are completely free of charge. If you subscribe, you'll get notified every time a new live stream is up. And if you're watching today, not in real time, but maybe hours or days or even weeks after this stream is put out, drop me a like. It helps with the Facebook algorithms a lot. We always want to expand this conversation and share it with more folks. And drop me a comment, like how are things going for you? What kind of needs are you running into? What speaks to you? Going to share just a few more tips about overcoming some of the keys to overcoming social anxiety. So first of all, give yourself some time. Go slow. You can always take 10 seconds, take a couple of deep breaths, and choose consciously what it is you're going to do next. In the absence of that, we tend to be reactive, we tend to act by reflex, and that is not our best self. If folks aren't patient with you, if they seem to be judgmental, then those are folks that aren't worth knowing. But wait and see what the judgment is. Don't assume, don't project, and notice when you're not allowing other people to have their own opinion. Notice the ways that you're putting pressure on yourself. Notice simple things like muscle tension. Notice your breathing. So many of us, when we're feeling anxious, just go into fight or flight mode. And there's ways in which that manifests in our body. And there's the little jump start that the hamster wheel in your head gets and your thoughts start racing. Ground yourself. Release that muscle tension. Take those deep breaths. It'll slow down your heart rate. It'll lower your blood pressure. Control always begins with the physical. We move up from there. And the more that we cope, the better control we have. In addition to fight or flight, a lot of us have freeze or fawn. Freezing is just the panic and the paralysis, and it feels like you can't do absolutely anything. Give yourself grace during those times. Give yourself a little extra patience during those times. Ask people to be patient with you. If they're good people, they will be receptive and they'll be understanding. It's kind of like when folks do public speaking. The biggest tip around speaking publicly is don't try to hide the fact that you're nervous. Say so and ask folks to be patient with you. Public speaking is the most common fear that exists in our culture. It's very common that people are anxious about this. And so when a speaker asks us to be patient with them, we typically readily do so because we have some sense of how scary it is to be up there, right? Same thing in a 12-step meeting, same thing in anything that's conducive to your recovery. What it's really about here is that we're becoming progressively comfortable with ourselves. And this is largely a matter of self-acceptance. There are so many benefits to recovery. There are so many promises that come true. And at the heart of that is coming to relate to ourselves in a way that is fair and respectful. Ultimately, my hope for people is that they come to a place where they genuinely feel good about themselves, genuinely love themselves. But we can't skip steps. And so the more that we're practicing self-respect, the more that we are allowing ourselves fairness, and the more that we're taking the advice that we give to people we care about, gradually our lives become more manageable. As they become more manageable, new possibilities are created. And if we can accept that those new possibilities are going to include moments where we feel really awkward, really feel like we don't know what we're doing, at its worst, those feelings manifest as imposter syndrome, feeling like we're a fraud, like it's only a matter of time till folks see through us. Again, it's really hard to be yourself when you don't know who that is. Through the course of recovery, we come to recognize a great many things. And one of the biggest ones is that no good person in recovery judges someone by their past. They judge them by who they're trying to be today. So whatever it is in your past that you're so ashamed of, feel so guilty about, ask yourself, would you really judge another person for that? Or would you be concerned about how they're overcoming that, how they're seeking to transform their lives, how they're looking to do better? If you go into any recovery setting, then by definition you are not surrounding yourself with a group of saints. You're surrounding yourself with people who have probably done some bad things and have probably lived with an enormous amount of shame and guilt. But what they're transforming and building today is a life that is based on wonderful things, virtues and health and love and relationships and all of the good things that we most want. Bear in mind, too, that when you're feeling socially anxious and there's that self-consciousness that comes with it, remind yourself that no good person in recovery will judge you by the car that you drive. They won't judge you by what you've done for a living. They won't judge you by your level of education or your aesthetics. I really don't care what people look like. It couldn't matter less to me. What I'm interested in is, do you seem to be a kindred spirit? Are you fucked up in the ways that I am? Is there a good chance that we can connect and help each other develop a greater understanding of ourselves? Are you somebody that can hold me accountable, challenge me, support me? And at the end of the day, the awkwardness of admitting that you need that friend, that you need that support, is worth it in spades. As uncomfortable as it may be to admit those things, as long as we're hiding them, we can't get our needs met around them. Okay, couple of last-minute questions. Helen, how did you find me? Well, my name's Jim LaPierre, and you might have found me through my Facebook feed as Jim LaPierre. You can find me and connect with me on Sober Now's Facebook page. Would love to know you from there. You might have found me on Choose Help. So no matter how we connected with each other, I would love to connect more. So drop me an email, jim@sobernow.com. Friend me on Facebook. Would love to connect. Rebecca, thanks for writing in. What about if it's like a knee-jerk reaction, changes or ringing in the ears and dizziness? Okay. If you're noticing that your body's giving you really strong distress signals, that loss of equilibrium, that pounding headache, anything that's happening in terms of your balance physically, then I think taking a step back and helping yourself to regain physical control by coping is going to be key. And having patience with yourself means don't beat yourself up for having that reaction, because beating yourself up is, first of all, it guarantees that we're not going to learn the lesson. And secondly, if you're trying to encourage someone's learning, healing, growth, the worst possible thing you can do is be critical of them. We want to be accepting of them, and we want to encourage them and just say, let's just keep trying until we get it right. Helen, thanks for sharing. I'm sorry that you've had this experience, that you had a negative experience in rehab, and maybe ideas around 12-step fellowships or God uh, didn't work for you. And I would say, first of all, there's an enormous amount of diversity between meetings. So if one particular group or meetings in one particular town didn't work for you, I strongly urge you to try other ones. 12-step fellowships are no different than a place of employment or a place of worship. It all depends upon who's there, right, and who shows up. So I've had all kinds of experiences, from the workplace to volunteering to different friend groups, where maybe my needs were met, maybe they weren't. And I need to look at that two ways. First of all, am I in touch with what I need? Am I asking for my needs to be met? And secondly, am I connecting to the right people? Am I giving them an opportunity to come through for me? Is this my tribe, or do I need to look elsewhere? So, wrapping it up for today. But again, please do connect with me. I would love to hear what's going on with you. I'm going to be away next week for vacation, but I'll be back here 2 weeks from today, Thursdays at noon Eastern Time. We do the live stream, and always want to connect with you. So drop me a like, drop me a comment, let me know how things are going for you, and we will talk soon. Be well.